right. So thank you everyone for joining us today. As we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Nick Board. I work in the Division of Student Auxiliary Services, working with marketing, with housing, and a few other departments. And also on this call today, I have Mark Anderson, who is a community director in Ghaffari Hall. He'll be guiding us through some tips and tricks and best practices with living with a roommate, going through roommate agreements, as well as how to be the best roommate you can, especially in light of some of the precautions with COVID-19. As we begin all of our presentations, we like to just start off with our mission statement in housing. Housing and residential life really works to foster student learning and success, both in and out of the classroom. And we do that by supporting our residents in safe, comfortable, and convenient residence halls, apartments, and dining environments, and really help your student or you as a student grow through your time here with us. So with that, I want to go ahead and hand this over to Mark, who will take the lead on going through some of the roommate.
There we go. Hey, everyone. Once again, my name is Mark. I work in Ghaffari Hall. And Ghaffari Hall is predominantly underclassmen. A large chunk of our building is freshmen. And so I'm not sure what the makeup is of the attendees of this group. But that's the building that I work in. Although we, of course, I've worked with other kinds of spaces in the past and that kind of thing too. So if you are an upperclassman or maybe a transfer student or something, I hope that you can also get something out of this, because I think that, you may live with the same person every year, but even when the type of room changes or situations in people's lives change or, whatever, it's really good to continue to have these types of conversations with your roommate. So let's discuss the process of what we officially go through and that we require of our students who live on campus. And then we'll also talk about some tips and tricks, and then some tips just specifically centered around COVID, and some extra precautions or some extra conversations that you may need to have. So just like Nick said, if you do have a specific question, there's a Q&A down at the bottom. If you click that and write the question, we'll see that as panelists and we'll be able to answer those on the spot. But I am going to attempt to share my screen here. Oh, Nick, can you help? In a minute, I'm going to share my screen. And what we're going to go through is basically the roommate agreement that we're going to go through. So how that works is that every student on the day they move in will have a few days to go through resident orientation, which of course is online right now. But basically it's just a bunch of modules to kind of get students acclimated with the residential community and our partners. So part of that module will go through basically a bunch of brainstorming questions. And then once, there we go. Okay, and then once they go through that, about a week into the semester or so, every resident advisor is required to have conversations with every space, whether that's just a double room or a suite or an apartment or something like that. And they'll all meet together, probably virtually, with their resident advisor, and they'll actually complete a roommate agreement. So it's not legally binding, but of course, that's where we're going to fall back to if there are roommate discrepancies or any kind of tension that may lead to a mediation. It's basically, this is what we've agreed on. We of course can adapt and change that as we go, but if there are issues going on, that's a really good conversation piece to say, no, this is what we filled out at the beginning of the year, so this is what we need to stick to. But the roommate prep here is really to be done on your own, and this is going to be part of the residential the resident orientation piece that students will do by themselves. So these are just really good questions to think through. You know, the term clean is not necessarily like everyone has kind of their different definition of what clean looks like. Is clean, but not is clean but cluttered okay? Like what are my standards and what would I expect from other roommates in my space? So it's important to think about that before going into that conversation. How much time do you prefer being around people versus alone? And especially if you're in a double room or something like that, you know, you might not have a space to go to alone. So it's good to have a conversation with your roommate or roommates to say, hey, you know, I need like peace and quiet when I'm studying. And so like if I'm doing that in my room, maybe we can work towards doing, you know, study time together, or I can find an alternate space sometime and you can, you know, or if you're like me, you kind of like white noise or something going on around you while you're studying. So that's just kind of a good conversation to have. And also I think it's not necessarily, it's not, your roommate doesn't have to be your best friend. And I think that that's something that people really struggle with. I've had plenty of roommates in my life that I get along with. We live at peace together, but you know, I'm not going to go out to eat a bunch of times with my friend on the weekends with my roommate or something like that. And that's okay. I think oftentimes best friends struggle living together because, you know, the tension is harder to handle. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm just saying be cautious. You know, if you're going in with a good friend, I think especially then you really need to set like strict boundaries for like, okay, I'm your friend, but I'm a little bit of an introvert. And so we need to keep our space. Best friends are not used to spending 24 hours a day together too. So be cautious with that. If you are coming into a room situation or rooming situation with a friend or a cousin or something like that, or, you know, brothers or sisters sometimes do that too, but just be cautious about that. Another question to think through is like, what are some things that I like to do in my room that may cause a distraction for other people? So is that, I like to do my push-ups every morning, which is fine. But like, that's something that maybe your roommate would like to know. So if they wake up and you're like sweating and you're working out or whatever, it's just good information for them to have. And maybe that could lead to a conversation of accountability. Hey, I want to work out too. Maybe we can work together and we can do yours and mine, or something like that. Gaming is a big deal. And sometimes people prefer gaming without headphones. And so, you know, that's fine, but when I'm sleeping, maybe not. So those are really important conversations to have, and studying too. One that's maybe people don't think about is climate. I know for me, I have a lot of opinions about the climate of the space that I live in. And it seems so silly, but like when people are too hot and can't sleep, or when people are freezing cold all night, like that's a big deal. And people have different comfort levels with their climate. And so thinking through, what is my preference and what ways am I able to stretch and be okay with, you know, am I okay with 68 to 74? Am I okay with being a little warm? Do I like to keep the window open for fresh air in the winter? Sometimes people like to do that. So just like conversations about climate is definitely important to have with your roommate. And so thinking through that beforehand is important too. We do have quiet hours during the number 5 here. We have quiet hours that start at 10 p.m. But sometimes people may have a different preference for when they might want things to be quiet. Maybe you are a late night person and you're okay with a little bit of noise in your room. Granted, quiet hours are 10 p.m., so it can't get too rowdy, but you know, maybe everyone in the room has classes that don't start until 11. And so you want to chill and relax and play games and listen to music at a reasonable volume until midnight. That's fine. You can talk to your roommates about that. But that's an important thing for you to consider. And then special requests around recycling, water conservation, things like that. I think people have different passion points. And so, you know, if somebody in the room is really passionate about recycling and other people have maybe lived in communities where there aren't recycling programs, that can be an opportunity to engage in some of those important things together. So things like that. Pet peeves are definitely important. I have little pet peeves that just set me off. And so talking through those and being like, hey, I know it's really weird, but when people bite their fingernails, it drives me crazy. So just so you know that that might irritate me a little bit more than it should, but that's just, my mom did it growing up or something like that, and it really sets me off. So pet peeves are important to talk about because some people do things in their just normal living daily life that other people get set off about. So having that conversation is important. And then of course, supporting your roommate. How can you support your roommate best? I think there's a lot of opportunity to have meaningful community in these spaces. And so thinking through, some things that you could do to make this living experience more beneficial or better for the other people living in the space is important. And then going along with that, how do you function in the room? What is your relationship like? That can be anything to, let's hang out sometimes, or let's study together, to, let's be cordial when we're in the space, but we both have different lives. And so we can just live those lives and just be communicating. One important thing to talk about is guests. And I do want to put out this disclaimer that the guest policy is suspended. And so when we talk about guests, particularly for this semester, of course, that's not a forever rule. It just kind of depends on what happens with COVID. But guests are an important thing to discuss. You have, 300 to 900 students living in a building together. And so we're not going to restrict who goes to whose room within the building. So talking about guests and, I'm fine with, guests coming in and having a good time, maybe overnight if we agree to it. Just guests are fine as long as we're communicating back and forth what's going on. I think that's important because if I'm coming in to the space and it's really late at night and I've just spent all day studying and I need to wake up early for a test and there's 3 or 4 people in the room, I'm going to be frustrated about that. And so just having that conversation is really important. And then of course, dietary restrictions, medical concerns, religious or lifestyle topics, anything just about your daily life that you might want to inform people of. If you have certain prayer times, or if you have a gluten allergy, or if you're a vegetarian, I think things like that are just important to talk about. Obviously, you talk about whatever you're comfortable with, but if the people that are living in your space know some of the backstory of the things that you need to work through, or things that you just kind of have to avoid, or whatever, I think that's a really good way to live in a space in a healthy way. So there are those are some brainstorming questions for people to think about, and it's definitely a good thing to have these questions prepared ahead of time, just so that you can have a fruitful conversation that doesn't involve any arguing or doesn't take too long. And another important thing to remember is that if you are in an apartment space or a suite space, then there's your specific room, and then there's the living room, the community space that all of the residents could live in. So that's a conversation about how do we want to function in, our main common spaces. If I have some people over and we're watching TV, or, can we study in that space? If so, when, what do we want to, how do we want to approach each other when asking, hey, this is too loud, or maybe could you consider turning it down? Or, hey, I noticed that you're studying, but I would love to have some friends over. So could you maybe relocate? And I know that those conversations just seem uncomfortable for people, but if you're setting the boundaries right at the beginning of the semester, then you're really able to have those conversations in a little more efficient way. And of course, your resident advisor is always willing to help. I'm going to share my screen one more time because it's minimized. We compiled another list, and it is just a couple of things to consider when you're living with a roommate in kind of the time of COVID. So let me share that. And, unfortunately for us, it's really important to think about a couple of more specific things regarding cleanliness, particularly right now, just because of this pandemic that's going on and how easily it can spread. So this is actually on our website. If you go to housing.wayne.edu/coronavirus, it's right on the side here, called Living with a Roommate. So here are a couple of extra things to consider doing, discussing what living safely together means. And of course, you can use the roommate agreement to guide that conversation. Disinfecting your items that you touch a lot. So high touch items, doorknobs, door handles, spaces in the bathroom, counters, kitchens, laptops, cell phones. Anything that you use on a daily basis is important to continue disinfecting those. And so if they're common spaces, it's good to discuss who's going to do what, or like, okay, I'm going to cook in the kitchen, but after anyone cooks in the kitchen, here is the regimen that we need to do in order to ensure safety. Wash your hands regularly with warm soap and water for at least 20 seconds constantly. And you could even make that a priority every time you walk into the room, because usually the bathroom is right there. So you can just go in, wash your hands, and consider it done. One thing that I sometimes forget about in a shared space is like things that I leave out, and especially in the bathroom. And so I would consider bringing like a personal shower bag or something like that, where you can put your toiletries in and, zip it up and tuck it away, so that you're sure either people aren't touching it, or like water from the sink isn't splashing on it, or people aren't leaving a bunch of things in the shower and that kind of thing. So it's a good common practice, but especially right now, with this being an airborne illness, it's important to make sure your toothbrush isn't exposed, your medicines and things like that. Just kind of keeping those in your own personal zipped up space tucked away. Wash your clothes and bedding often. I always struggled in college to remember to wash my bedding. I think that might be a silly male trait that I have, unfortunately, but people sometimes don't think about washing bedding. And so your bedding just needs to be washed regularly. I would recommend weekly, or maybe even more than that, because you don't know what types of people or whatever are in the space and what their exposure might be. So just be extra careful about bedding, making sure your clothes don't pile up too much. That's a general sanitary thing, but sometimes people just don't have time to do laundry, and I get it, but there's laundry spaces in every floor or every building. So just do that. I've found it a common practice to put a couple masks in my home, a couple masks in my car, maybe one in my backpack, because it's really easy to forget, because that's kind of a new thing. So just make sure you come prepared with a few masks, a few cloth masks. It seems like Amazon and other distributors have a lot of them readily available now. So just remember, you're not allowed outside, like in the halls, without a mask, or in the common spaces or anything like that. So it's important to have them, and you'll likely need them for classes and things like that too. So make sure you have masks handy. And when you're not wearing your mask, just make sure you're sneezing, coughing in your elbow. If it's allergy season, make sure you're making people aware of that. If you, I got a runny nose, it's allergy season, but I might get tested anyway. Like, you all can create your own boundaries for things like that. And then of course, follow all CDC and campus health center guidelines. If you're experiencing any symptoms, our campus health center is amazing. They'll work with you to get things done, or send you somewhere that can. And then hold yourself accountable to the roommate agreement and review the housing Q&A. Some things not to do. Don't forget that you're a shared space. Be cautious of your music habits, your virtual socializing habits, and your physical socializing habits, workout habits, etc. A lot of people are used to having their own rooms. Everyone comes from a different, unique family structure. So it's important to just kind of work through those things and be upfront with some stuff. And if you're feeling frustrated about some things that one of your roommates is doing, talk to your RA. They can work through it with you. They can pull out a roommate agreement and have like a mediated conversation about that. One thing that is can turn pretty toxic is just accusing roommates of having certain diseases because they have certain symptoms. Just be really careful about those conversations. That can turn into, oh my God, do you have COVID? I just heard you sneeze. I'm going to stay away. Watch out. Just be careful about that, because allergy season is different for every person. And sometimes people are more susceptible to common colds, or the flu or something like that. So just make sure that you're not accusing people, you're just being cautious. And in order to mitigate that, you can just be honest yourself. Yeah, I know I sneezed. It's allergy season. There's pollen everywhere right now. It really bothers me. So that's all it is. I took an allergy pill yesterday. It went right away. So I'll go take one right now. Or just conversations like that are important. And then I think one thing that you can just avoid doing is just going to big parties. There aren't going to be any on campus, but if there's a frat party, or if there's, a concert downtown or something like that, who knows what the world will look like in August, September, October, November. So just be cautious about being in large groups, and make sure you're following social distancing rules when you are out in public. Just be really careful. I think there's a lot of new things to consider. Another thing that you need to consider is, creating an agreement for who's going to buy sanitation supplies or soap, or are we just going to all get our own? Am I in charge of Lysol, but you're in charge of sanitizer? Those kinds of things for your own personal space. Just making sure that communication is key, and that you're doing what you can do to alleviate stress, but also to feel safe, physically in your space, but also health-wise. We want everyone to feel safe. So that is all I got. And I was just told that we're going to be providing a few cloth masks to students moving in. So, I have like 4 or 5, and they're scattered around my entire life. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to bring a couple as well if you have access to that, but we will provide a couple. So yeah, that's my spiel.
Thanks, Mark. We want to open it up for anyone who has questions at this time. Take advantage of the Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll give a few minutes in case anyone has them.
As questions roll in, I did want to remind you all, students have access to see who their roommate or roommates are within the housing portal. And it would be good to connect, even just simply for logistical reasons, like, do you have a fridge or a microwave, or what appliances are you planning to bring? Not every room needs 2 fridges, 2 microwaves, that kind of thing. So it would be good to just reach out and have an initial conversation. And a good icebreaker for that is just to send a quick text to say, hey, it looks like we're paired up as roommates in Ghaffari. Just want to introduce myself and wondered, if we can kind of discuss logistics. I know sometimes it's a little awkward to send a text message to a random number to somebody you haven't met, but it's good to have that conversation before you come in, because then you don't have to haul fridges back home when you bring them, or, that kind of thing.
All right. Well, it doesn't look like anyone's got any questions. So great job, Mark, in covering all of that information. As moving gets closer, you'll learn more and get more resources to support you and your roommates. As always, you can, if you have any questions, email us at housing@wayne.edu, or visit housing.wayne.edu, our website, and take advantage of the live chat feature there. And we also want to invite you to our next webinar, which is this Thursday in partnership with the Office of the Bursar, covering paying for housing and some common things that might be overlooked by people to make sure that your payment process is smooth. So we want to thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.